Working.
Okay, we're going.
All right, everyone. So, welcome to our third episode of our international series. Today we have Kent Bastell. Kent is actually from Calgary, but we worked with each other in China, and he has spent a season working with the Shanghai women's team, the under 18s, where he was preparing them for the women's game, and also where they, if I'm correct, won the nationals. So Kent has a lot of good experience from there. So I'm excited for this episode. So those in the women's game, around the under 18 level, I'm sure you'll find a lot of gems in this episode. So um, let's head over to Kent, if you don't mind introducing yourself a little briefly, and then we'll get into it.
Right on. Thanks for having me. So my name's Kent, obviously. I'm from Alberta. Played football varsity in university. First degree was in psychology. Second degree, I did kinesiology and a master's in kinesiology. And then just did an internship at the Calgary Foothills football club as well. So, I've always loved football, watch it on TV. So it's always been a passion of mine. So through strength and conditioning, it's always been a dream for me to work within football in strength and conditioning. So I took the opportunity to get the job in China, where I actually met Mario. We worked with the snowboarding team. And then after the snowboarding team, I had the opportunity to go to Shanghai to, like he said, work with the U18 women's football team. So just a little bit of a background was the tournament is called the China National Games, and it happens every 4 years. So it's like the internal China Olympics. So the reason why it's so important is that it's basically whoever wins or places well in this tournament, those teams get the funding for the next 4 years going into the next tournaments. So these teams take it quite seriously. That's why, they hire full-time strength and conditioning coaches, and they have a multi-disciplinary team with these athletes to kind of propel them to try to win the national championship. So we were fortunate enough to win. So everybody was pretty happy about that.
Wow. Yeah, cool. What team was that exactly? The club's name?
So it was basically called the Shanghai 18. They representing the province of Shanghai.
Now, I have a question for you, just to kind of get an idea of how the league works out. So if that's a U18, is there a first team women's league, and do they play under this club?
Yeah. So basically this team was like an unofficial U18 team to the women's professional team. So the women's professional team trained with us as well.
Right.
So Shanghai team they were also league champions, and they host probably 30 to 40% of the women's national team. So it was kind of cool. We got to train in the similar environment as the senior women's as well.
Cool.
Okay, cool, Ken. So why don't we, because we spoke about this before, kind of when you got there, what was some deficits that you saw where you can make an impact to improve the performance of the players? And how did you go about that? Because we talked about a lot in terms of the physical side. And I think in the women's game, and we talked about before with previous guests, the gap from under 18, the first team, there is that physical gap. What do you see on the women's side? Well, I guess more so with your experience in China. How did you approach that?
So I think the first thing that I noticed was that most of their training was on the volume side. They were doing a lot of things at maybe a medium to light intensity. So whether that was training in the gym, whether that was, on the field doing acceleration, sprint work, change of direction, even the physical stuff. It was, in China, they love to do a lot of jogging because they think that, to have the better aerobic system is going to make them a better player on the field. But what we know from the physical side is that maybe you need a base of that, and maybe some positions, such as a central midfielder, will need more aerobic training. If you're only aerobic training a forward or a winger, or a center back who needs to get those quick accelerations, those quick sprints, we know that jogging isn't going to make them faster. So what I really saw was that everybody had kind of plateaued in the way that they were gaining strength and the way that they were being able to get faster in the game. So when you look at the GPS data, many of the positions were actually pretty similar, which is pretty rare to see. So when I look at those teams, I thought, okay, let's train them on a more intensity side of the scale and see what happens.
Now, did you have, is that a conversation that you had with the head coach? Did you have that integrated into your own sessions? How did you go about kind of addressing that?
So it was pretty interesting because there was a little bit of a conflict because the assistant coach who used to be on the women's national team, she had kind of taken the role as the strength coach. And so she didn't want me there in the first place. So I was kind of battling against her the whole time because she wanted to protect what she was doing in her program, right, and kind of discredit me in my program. So the way I had to do it was, I did integrate it into my sessions. So I guess I could give you a little bit of a brief on the weekly split that they gave me. So for the first period of time that I was with them, we were building up to a qualification tournament. So before you can even go to the national games, you qualify. So basically what they gave me was Monday afternoon strength session. Tuesday, they gave me a pitch section to do whatever I wanted to do on the pitch. And then on Friday, they gave me a full strength session. And then they gave me 45 minutes to do whatever I want for warm up every single day. So this is kind of where I had to work my magic throughout the week. So basically, I just had to prove to them in my sessions through building up to the qualification that this was the way. So, Monday, we're doing a little bit more strength work, neural activation, power work, a lot of isometric training, just to get their bodies a foundation on how to produce force, again, how to just even build strength. Tuesday, we work on the pitch, we would do acceleration theme. So we would use sleds, we would use band resisted stuff, we would work on shapes, and we'd work on some plyometric stuff, so reactive strength. And we would hold it at a pretty high intensity. Mm-hmm. And then Friday, once again, it was another strength session. So typically by Friday, I would do something like, we would lift lighter weights faster. So trying to train more of that strength, speed strength things. So, and then when we got to the qualification tournament, what they saw was a huge improvement on not only the GPS data, which, strength coaches will always argue about the GPS data, but you could see it in their strength and conditioning numbers. So one very interesting thing about China is they have physical fitness testing. And this is a really important thing for the government. And sometimes they won't even let athletes compete in these tournaments unless they pass physical fitness measures. So not only am I trying to build strength for soccer specifically, I'm also trying to cater to this physical test. So, things like 30-meter sprint, counter movement jump, et cetera, et cetera. We had to train for those as well.
Wow. Cool. So can we dial it back and dive into, just, if you don't mind, providing some examples of what that Monday would look like, what that Tuesday would look like on the pitch, and then what that Friday would look like. So you kind of touched on the themes, but just for the people listening at home, like, let's say a few example exercises. So what would a strength day look like? What kind of an isometric exercise would that be? On the Friday, what would those power exercises look like? If you don't mind touching on a few examples, then I would like to get into like kind of the impact that you saw in the GPS data later on once you started to build and accumulate that program.
Right. So typically on our strength days, we're training our main strength kind of movement patterns. So, things you can think of like upper body pulls, such as rows, good postural, good stability exercises for the upper body push, things like bench press, weighted push-ups, etc. For hip extension, lower body pull, things like hip thrust or deadlifting. And then for the lower body push, things like squats, split squats, rear foot elevated split squats, those type of movements. And so to integrate that into an isometric, the way that I did it was the first exercises that we did, because it was more of a trying to build a foundation, we would do things like a split squat hold. So for example, just to train the body to own these positions, we would have them set up in a split squat, and they would hold that position, maybe holding on to some weights for 30 seconds. Now, if anybody's ever tried that, they understand that there's a really big burn, and you have to fight through that. You get a lot of neurological drive into those tissues. And so typically we'd do 2 sets of the isometric, and then we would roll into more of a isotonic or like a full movement type rep. So that could be a back squat. So we've kind of primed them before, we've got them ready for that squat to be strong in those bottom positions with the isometric. And then we have them go through the actual squat. And so, you know, at those beginning phases, doing maybe 8 to 10 reps on both sides, just because we're trying to build a strength foundation. So they were getting a good amount of volume with, you know, some good exercises and good movement patterns that maybe translate well to acceleration, speed, running, etc. And then on a Tuesday was more of a movement-based session. So after a good warm-up, these are where we start training some of the patterns for running. So, you know, a lot of people do skips, bounds, you know, and then we would build up to being able to do sled training. So the way that I would do was, if we don't have a sled at home, you can use a band and a partner. And basically the first few weeks we work on acceleration. So partner can hold the band or you push a sled, and we would go maybe for 5 to 10 meters. But we're always training maximum intent. It's the most important thing that I think you guys have set up in the past in your podcast. Like, you got to go at the maximum intent when you're doing these exercises. And then building from the sled acceleration, we would go into a unweighted, so just body weight acceleration. So once again, almost how we did with the isometric is that we prime the body with those heavier accelerations. So something that is resisting you. And then we go into the actual acceleration, where now you're using your body and you're using the power that you've just developed between your brain and your muscles to then push you through that movement. So, you know, the first block was acceleration focus, and then the second block was more of a maximum velocity. So we do similar things, but we just increase the distance. And on the Friday, once again, looking at those movement patterns, upper body push, upper body pull, lower body of the same. But now, instead of being really tired and not being able to push, you know, by the 10th rep, like we did on the Monday. So for example, on the Monday strength day, if you're doing heavier weights, by the 10th rep, you should be really struggling to get it up. But on the Friday, we would reduce the reps to maybe a 6 to 8 range. And it was more about the speed at which you can move the bar. So for example, if we did another back squat, now it's less about grinding through, but it's more about how fast can you move the bar at a lighter weight. So basically, we're trying to do a little bit of a strength day, more of a dynamic day, and then a speed day.
That's wicked.
So yeah, it was good. And then, you know,
really good structure. It sounds like, you know, we did we posted our episode 5, and it's funny because we try to give a foundation to somebody to even do it at home. And it's interesting that the way that you broke it down, and Mario it was the one that kind of set up that workout, and it's very similar. And you guys can see, obviously, you have kind of knowledge from the same places, and it's interesting. I wanted to ask you, you talked about the intensity, right, being a big factor. How did you how did you approach changing that, or how did you approach, because I think that intensity is something that's subjective, right? And some people might not even understand, what you're referring to. So how did you go about, managing through proper intensity in repetitions?
Right. So I think actually intensity, to get the best out of your athletes as a coach, and this is, if any coaches are listening, the first thing is that you have to get the athletes to trust you and like your session. Because if you don't have the energy, like for example, we have music pumping, I'm flying all over the place on the field, and generally on the off days, I care a lot about the athletes and I talk to them a lot and I speak to them. And what you do is you gain a trust. So when you tell them to do something and you're fair to them, they will always follow you because they don't want to disappoint you.
Right.
And then, so that's from a psychological standpoint. From a physical standpoint, I did some things that were, it was more of a psychological, like reflexive thing. So typically make it competitive, so if we're doing velocity days or we're doing, accelerations, always having people racing against each other. A second way to do it is chasing drill. So what I learned from psychology was that if somebody is being chased, it actually brings out a reflexive mechanism in their body in which they actually push harder to get away from something. So we always use the analogy of when we're little and we're in the basement,
right,
and we turn the lights off and we run up the stairs. You probably never move as fast as a little kid than running up those stairs because you think there's a monster behind you. So for example, if we're doing, a velocity day, you put a flag in the back pocket of one of the athletes and you get them to chase each other. And it kind of stimulates a reflex in them to push it harder because the person chasing is competitive. They want to get the flag. The person running away, they feel like there's that monster behind them and they're running as fast as they can. So, there's little ways that you can get the buy-in for intensity.
No, I think that competing is probably the easiest one, right? As soon as you make it competitive and at the end of the day, you're kind of hitting 2 points, right? You're hitting that competitive aspect where you're doing it because you want to win. I think we have that, and I'm sure you still are familiar with structure here. Everything is pulled away from maintaining scores because they don't want players to not feel, or feel bad about themselves. And so it's interesting, right? Like when you prep a player, even from the way that they train, right? You make everything a competition because at the end of the day, that's the nature of sport.
Just to add to that, if anyone's kind of coaching a speed session at home or something, like the best way to kind of finish off the high-end sprint work is to create a race or something. Like I always like to finish my speed sessions with some sort of race, competitive thing, whether they're reacting to a color cone or something, but they're competing against their teammate and they want to beat their teammate. So they're going to put in max intent, where, if you just have an athlete just sprinting by himself and you tell them just sprint as fast as you can, it's,
exactly.
Very few athletes might respond well to that, but, now they're racing their teammate and they want to beat them. Okay. Now you're getting way more out of your session.
And if you were to tell a kid like sprint 100%, it's not something that some kids that are 8 years old might even measure, right? I think I see that a lot. Like kids think that they are moving their arms faster or they're moving their feet quicker, and so they're running faster. But as soon as you put an objective, like I even do some stuff recently with my youngest age groups, where as soon as you now bounce a tennis ball and they got to catch it before it drops, now you're getting a maximal intent by just the nature of the exercise, right?
Yeah. And I think, what I noticed in the girls' game compared to the boys is that there's a reluctance to compete against each other.
Yeah.
This is one of the main differences is like sometimes when I'm doing a drill, they hold back a little bit because of sometimes it's fear, depending on what we're doing. Sometimes it's just not in the nature of their team. Their team is very close. They're friends. They don't like sometimes to have winners and losers. especially at that age group, because it's not really maybe socially acceptable to embarrass your teammates. But, you know, with this team, I really made it. And so I mentioned before, like I got to do the warm up. I did a 45-minute warm up every single day, and every single day had a different theme. And mostly with this different theme, I made some sort of competition before they went into practice, almost like, once again, priming them to be physical. So for example, on a Monday, my theme was curved running. Mm-hmm. So we do our warm up, and then I would set up, you know, a 15-minute kind of warm up of curved running. So for example, we could do long curves, so around the halfway circle. And every time we did the curve running, it would be a chase drill. So you would have two athletes running around the circle, and the objective was for one athlete to catch the other athlete. Right. And I've seen other drills where they do the figure eights and stuff like that. They're running around the eights and trying to catch each other. You know, once again, that stimulates that reflex.
Right.
You know, on a Tuesday, we did more of a plyometric thing, so a little less competition. But on a Wednesday, we did a physical battle. So my whole theme for that whole warm-up was physical battle. So for example, we'd have two athletes shoulder to shoulder. I would bounce a ball as high as I could bounce it. And the objective was for them to battle each other one-on-one to see who could gain possession of the ball. Right. And then, you know, you can do other things like, you know, now they have, whoever wins the ball has to keep possession for 10 seconds. And whoever wins that possession, I know we always talk about, you know, physical punishment isn't really good, but it's like you do something stupid like 10 burpees or 10 push-ups at the end. So you give them that little bit of incentive to battle each other harder.
Right.
So, you know, basically within anything that you can do as a coach, you can always, especially with females, is, you know, get them physical against each other. Because once they do it, once they understand that it's safe, and they're going to take some knocks, they're going to, you know, I saw some pretty big knocks in these battle drills. But, you know, when you're doing strength work, and this is another kind of thing, you know, strong athletes aren't afraid to go into challenges. You know, it's like a human reflex, right? Where they say, like, if you're not strong enough, you're reluctant. But as soon as you put them in the gym, they start being more confident with their bodies. Then the reflex goes into, okay, I can handle this. So that's a good piece of advice for any coaches that are training females, is get them in those gritty, dirty positions where they have to fight one another. Because if they can't fight one another, they're not going to fight the other team. So what we found with our team was nobody could out battle us.
Right. And I like what you said there, because that's an often overlooked, or something else I really talked about, the psychological effect of an athlete who does the strength training. Like, they feel stronger, their body feels better, and then they feel it when they go into a challenge. They're like, oh wow, like, you know, that felt less impactful on my body. I won that easier than I used to. Okay, I can hold my own. I could kind of go into challenges way harder. That psychological effect, like, how much would that carry over in confidence on the pitch? You know, I think that's something you can't really measure, and it's also something that, you know, is often overlooked. But I want to kind of go back to, okay, so did your program, right? We saw your program layout. What carryover did that have in the game? Because I know, you know, I'm listening to this and I'm a coach. Okay, yeah, you made them faster, you improved acceleration, you improved strength, great. But how did that make them better on the pitch? So what did you see change in their game? You know, you had this culture where they're obsessed with volume. Now you know, build some intensity and some speed and power into them. What did that look like on the pitch? What reflected in the GPS data, you know, and did performance improve at all?
Yeah. So, I mean, once again, the best way we can look at it is kind of two ways. Number one, because this team, and we had the COVID virus, was typically we played against boys teams. So we played against the Shanghai the professional men's teams academies. And so what we could see was at the very beginning of me coming there, physically, they were getting owned a lot. You know, even though we were playing an age group younger than us, you know, when it came to accelerations, it came to physical battles, it came to many of these things. It was actually very interesting to see the change that happened to them in the second half of the campaign towards the national games. All of a sudden, there's boys laying on the field. All of a sudden, these boys who are knocking balls past the defenders can no longer outsprint them or accelerate them. The girls had probably, they had more of a step. And so you could actually see on the GPS data that the sprinting meters went up because they're actually getting past the threshold of what would be sprinting, be categorized as sprinting. The top speed went up. So by the end of my time with them, you know, they had increased almost about 0.75 meters per second average across the team per game for a top speed. So, you know, the whole team was running at a top speed of 0.75 meters per second faster in each game that they were playing on average.
Right.
The third thing we saw was the injuries went away. So probably one of the happiest statistics that I had with the team was that we actually only had one major injury the entire time I was there. And when I say major injury, I mean, that's an injury that took more than 1 week for them to come back on the pitch. So here's another good thing is that when you start building the strength, you build the speed, you build the confidence in the body. Now all of a sudden they can match up against better opponents and they're going to stay on the field for longer. And the athletes that stay on the field for longer in their careers are the ones that are going to be successful. So this isn't just about performance. This is about confidence in the body and injury prevention as well. And so we also played against a first division university team for women. That was our other kind of main competition in Shanghai. And some of these were former national team players. And our girls were going toe to toe with them. And our team was mostly 16, 17 years old, playing against women who are 22, 23, who are a little bit more physically developed. But once again, nobody on our team is laying on the pitch at the end of the game with an injury. If anything, the other team had a lot more situations. And we saw that kind of throughout all our competitions, was just nobody could really knock us off the ball. Nobody could really injure us. We could take hits a lot more. We were a lot more resilient as a team. So, and the statistics, whether that's sprinting, running, you know, we probably scored 30% of our goals from set pieces. So the jumping, headers, there's a lot of bravery within that team. And you could really see it through their physical development. So that's when you start getting the buy-in from the team and the coaches, is when they see that. In that first qualification tournament, they saw how physically amazing we were. And we also got third place in the fitness, when in the last fitness test, they got something like 20th. So you could see the progression in them.
Right. And I was going to ask you that because you mentioned at the beginning that you originally were kind of, you know, bumping heads with the head coach. I would imagine that perspectives change, but at the end of the day, it's human nature, right? Like you have to earn that. You're coming in with an idea and you really got to prove to people that if you're going to suggest something else, then it better be, you know, you better back it up, and you only back it up with results. And so how was that? Are you in better connection with that head coach now, or?
Well, so it was the assistant coach. And so after that, after the qualification tournament, it was a lot less battling against me.
Yeah.
You know, because here is very reputation based as well. So you do kind of start on at negative. They don't trust you.
Of course. And
you have to earn it, like you said. And so by the end, the mind had opened up to working with me. It wasn't perfect. We still butt heads because we have a different philosophy. But, in the end, my program, I had a lot more ability to do what I wanted to do. And I wasn't afraid to put that forward, right, even though I knew it was against their value.
Cool. All right. So I think that was, we're going to have to wrap up here, guys, but I think that was a lot of information dense, for sure. Really good stuff there, and take home aways, for the people at home. Just before we sign off, last couple of minutes here, Kent, so if you were to give, one little piece of advice for, let's say in Canada, you have under 17, under 18 level, maybe they want to make it to the pro game. They might want to compete at the university level, some gaps to focus on at that age, really quick. What are some things they should be looking at?
Well, I think to close the gap, I think number one, get in the gym, find a good coach. I think that's one of the most important things. Like working in China, I've met a lot of international coaches from a lot of countries, and just because they have a fancy accent doesn't mean that they know what they're doing. You have a good coach if they have you doing real strength work and not standing on Bosu balls all the time and, doing that medium intensity work. So find a good coach. Strength train at least twice a week. Going through, even if you're just going through those basic movement patterns, strength train 2 to 4 times. Hit everything at least twice. Do some heavy, do some faster type movement. Number 2, kind of protect yourself. So the way that I kind of protected joints is I would go through a joint checklist. So we have joints like neck, shoulder, knees, hips. And during those strength sessions, I'm not only doing strength work, but I would make sure I hit at least 1 exercise per week for each joint, and maybe 2 or 3 exercises for the more important joints like hips, knees, ankles. So working calves, etc.
Awesome.
Third thing, and we didn't really mention this more on the technical side, is to become a master of the basic skills. So this isn't even just physical. This is, this team would have complete practices dedicated to just pinging long passes.
Right.
Pinging balls into the box where the defender had to head the ball out or defend against the forward. They would ping in corners for hours. Free kicks, shooting, and they would just refine these skills over and over again. Now, not to do it to the point where you're in pain or suffering, but the best athletes in the world, you always hear the stories, the last ones to leave practice because they're just refining their skill over and over again.
Definitely.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Sorry, Ken, we're going to have to wrap it up now, but yeah, good chat. If anyone wanted to get in contact with you or look you up, where can they find you?
Yeah. So basically my email, kentbastell@gmail.com. My Instagram handle is just Kent Bastell, and or LinkedIn. So it's Kent Bastell. So pretty simple.
Right. Cool.
Thanks for your time, man.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Good chat,
See you
boys.
guys.